The S&P gaining 0.8% today and closing just 6 points off its all-time high hit more than 4 months ago. The Nasdaq also just off its best level, up 1% today. And as we are getting ready to close out the month and the quarter, it's been tech and energy leading the charge. But recent moves in one other area really caught our eye today.
California's Central Valley has long been hailed as the heart of American agriculture, a sprawling, fertile landscape that produces over a third of the vegetables and 2/3 of the fruits and nuts consumed in the United States. But now, that beating heart is faltering, facing unprecedented water shortages, unrelenting droughts, climate change, and the slow collapse of aquifers that have supported the land for generations. The largest farm systems in the nation are beginning to sink, both figuratively and literally. As subsidence swallows the productivity of once rich soil, the entire structure of America's food supply is beginning to buckle. What many don't yet realize is how this slow-motion disaster could ripple through the grocery stores where everyday consumers shop, forcing major supermarket chains into crisis. For 10 of the biggest names in American grocery retail, the disappearance of the Central Valley's bounty might spell the beginning of the end. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. Kroger, the largest supermarket chain in the United States by revenue, with over 2,700 stores under various banners, has long depended on California's Central Valley for a steady stream of fresh produce. From grapes and lettuce to tomatoes and almonds, the region has been a silent partner in keeping Kroger's produce aisles vibrant and its prices competitive. But that dependence may now be its Achilles heel. As the Central Valley's output shrinks and transportation costs rise due to supply scarcity, Kroger faces a twofold problem: tightening margins and disillusioned customers. Consumers accustomed to affordable organic spinach or budget-friendly strawberries may soon balk at spiking prices or empty shelves. While Kroger has diversified its sourcing somewhat, the sheer scale of its operations makes a rapid pivot almost impossible. Supply chain disruptions don't just mean higher prices. They also mean missed expectations and fractured trust. As Kroger tries to stay afloat amidst increasing competition from more agile rivals and rising pressure from investors, the disappearance of California's agricultural might could be the catalyst that begins to erode its dominance. Albertsons, the second largest traditional grocery chain in the U.S., is arguably in a more precarious position. The chain operates numerous banners including Safeway, Vons, and Jewel Osco, many of which are deeply integrated with West Coast markets. These stores have historically marketed themselves as go-to destinations for fresh, local produce, an image that has relied heavily on California's agricultural abundance. But that image is quickly crumbling. As yields diminish and the cost of sourcing fresh food from alternate states or countries rises, Albertsons finds itself in a tight corner. It lacks the technological backbone and e-commerce prowess of competitors like Amazon-owned Whole Foods, making it vulnerable not just to logistical challenges, but also to consumer migration. In the past decade, Albertsons has already closed hundreds of underperforming stores, and now, as its sourcing model implodes, entire regions may become unprofitable. If the Farm Belt shrinks beyond a certain threshold, Albertsons could be forced into an identity crisis, one that could make parts of its sprawling footprint disappear entirely. Publix, the southern grocery titan beloved for its spotless stores and famously courteous staff, might seem like an unlikely casualty of a crisis centered in California. But the chain, despite its regional identity, is heavily reliant on the national food supply chain. Known for offering a wide selection of fruits, vegetables, and fresh prepared foods, Publix depends on the Central Valley's year-round growing season to stock many of the staples that define its brand experience. Bananas, berries, and avocados often make their way east from California's once thriving farms. And as that lifeline withers, Publix may struggle to maintain the level of quality and consistency its customers expect. This problem is compounded by the chain's relatively limited geographic reach, primarily in the southeastern U.S., which restricts its ability to shift operations or tap into new markets quickly. While Publix boasts high customer loyalty, even the most loyal shoppers may turn elsewhere if prices soar and quality dips. A gradual erosion of its competitive edge could be enough to drag Publix from its pedestal, leading to store closures or regional contractions as margins shrink and brand value declines. Sprouts Farmers Market, a chain that built its entire identity on natural, organic, and farm fresh foods, is perhaps the most existentially threatened by the collapse of California's agricultural infrastructure. With over 380 stores in 23 states, Sprouts positions itself as a champion of local farming and sustainable sourcing, values that resonate strongly with a health-conscious consumer base. But many of those values are anchored in the Central Valley, where small and medium-sized farms have historically supplied the high-quality produce that defines the Sprouts experience. Now, as drought and overuse drain the aquifers and dry the rivers, those very farms are disappearing. For Sprouts, this isn't just a supply problem, it's a brand implosion. The chain can attempt to import more from overseas or partner with greenhouse farms, but these shifts may undermine the freshness and locality promises that built its reputation. Moreover, the cost of maintaining quality while sourcing from farther away could squeeze the chain's already tight margins. Sprouts lacks the market breadth and financial muscle of giants like Walmart or Costco, making it far more vulnerable to even small shocks in its supply ecosystem. In a marketplace increasingly defined by price sensitivity and availability, the boutique charm of Sprouts may lose its luster, pushing the chain toward a slow and painful decline. Then there's Whole Foods, the upscale organic grocery brand that was once a symbol of premium health-conscious living. Now under Amazon's umbrella, Whole Foods has been trying to balance its niche appeal with the efficiencies of big tech logistics. Yet the disappearance of the Central Valley's massive agricultural output could throw a wrench into this balancing act. Whole Foods customers expect not only quality but also ethics, food that is fresh, sustainable, and locally sourced when possible. The chain has historically drawn a significant portion of its produce from California's environmentally conscious farms, often touting the provenance of its fruits and vegetables as part of the shopping experience. If these sources vanish or become economically unviable, Whole Foods may be forced to either compromise on its standards or hike prices dramatically, both of which risk alienating its core clientele. While Amazon's technological infrastructure and delivery network give Whole Foods some cushion, they can't replicate the unique conditions that make California's farmland so productive. As environmental degradation intensifies, Whole Foods may find itself squeezed between the rising cost of maintaining its brand ethos and the downward pressure of consumer expectations. In such a scenario, even with Amazon's backing, Whole Foods may be compelled to shrink its footprint, shutter underperforming stores, or pivot toward packaged goods, transforming it from a destination grocery store into a shell of its former self. The consequences of the Central Valley's collapse are not hypothetical. They're already in motion. Reports of sinking land in key farming areas, shrinking water tables, and permanently fallowed fields are no longer shocking outliers. They're the new norm. Crops that once thrived year-round are being abandoned. Orchards are being uprooted. Dust is replacing abundance. All of this spells trouble for supermarkets that built their distribution, marketing, and identity on the assumption that California would always deliver. This dependency, once a strategic advantage, is now a liability. Compounding the problem is the shifting regulatory landscape. With growing concerns over water rights, carbon emissions, and environmental sustainability, California's agricultural output is likely to face increasing legislative pressure. Restrictions on groundwater pumping, fines for excessive water use, and incentives to leave fields unplanted are all contributing to reduced productivity. For supermarket chains, this means less predictability, higher risk, and an urgent need to diversify their sourcing strategies. But diversification isn't as easy as finding a new supplier. Many of the fruits and vegetables that thrive in California simply don't grow as well elsewhere due to its unique climate and soil composition. Rebuilding the same volume of food production in other regions would take decades and billions in investment, time and money that supermarkets may not have. Technological solutions like vertical farming, hydroponics, and genetic modification offer some hope, but they're not ready to scale at the level needed to replace the Central Valley's output. Nor do they easily replicate the sensory experience of a ripe, sun-kissed peach or a freshly picked avocado, something consumers have come to expect. Moreover, transitioning to these methods would require massive capital investment, extensive logistical overhaul, and a complete rethinking of retail pricing structures. For supermarkets already operating on thin margins, such shifts could be the straw that breaks the camel's back. Urban consumers may feel insulated from these agricultural shifts, but they won't be for long. Prices are already rising. Seasonal items are showing up later in smaller quantities and at lower quality. Retailers are beginning to experiment with shrinkflation, smaller package sizes for the same price, and subtle changes in produce quality. But these are band-aids, not solutions. Once shoppers begin noticing empty shelves, wilted greens, or apple prices that rival filet mignon, their loyalty will falter. They'll experiment with meal kits, local co-ops, and alternative food sources. In this environment, brand reputation becomes both weapon and weakness. Supermarkets that can't deliver on their promises, whether it's low cost, high quality, or sustainable sourcing, will bleed customers. Financially, these shifts could be catastrophic. Supermarkets operate on notoriously slim profit margins, typically 1–2%. A sustained increase in sourcing costs, coupled with declining customer traffic, could push even major chains into the red. Private equity firms, always looking for vulnerable targets, may swoop in, initiate aggressive cost-cutting, and strip the stores of their character. We've seen this movie before. Chains that once dominated skylines disappearing almost overnight. Borders, Toys R Us, Sears. Grocery chains aren't immune to the same forces, and in many ways they're even more exposed. Kroger, Albertsons, Publix, Sprouts, and Whole Foods each face their own version of this nightmare scenario. For Kroger, it's the logistical nightmare of keeping its massive empire well-stocked. For Albertsons, it's the erosion of brand identity in core markets. For Publix, it's the growing chasm between expectation and reality. For Sprouts, it's the death of the very farms that gave it purpose. For Whole Foods, it's the ethical compromise that could hollow out its soul. All may not disappear overnight, but each faces a future where contraction becomes survival, and innovation is the only alternative to extinction. The future of American food retail will likely belong to those who can adapt fastest, not just to new supply chains, but to a new reality altogether. A reality where agriculture is no longer guaranteed, where sustainability isn't a luxury but a necessity, and where consumers are savvier, more demanding, and less forgiving. Supermarkets that cling to the old model of seasonal abundance shipped in from California will be left behind. The Central Valley may be fading, but the consequences of its decline are only beginning to take root across the nation's grocery aisles. The harvest is ending, and with it perhaps the era of the supermarket as we know it. As the Central Valley withers, it's not just the mega chains or the health-conscious grocers that teeter on the edge. Across the retail landscape, another layer of vulnerable supermarket brands faces the coming storm. Regional players, heritage names, and discount giants whose survival has long depended on the reliability of low-cost, high-volume produce from the West. While each has carved out its niche, none are immune to the slow collapse of the country's most productive agricultural zone. Here are more chains where the warning signs are growing sharper and where the dominoes may fall next. Winco Foods, a quietly expansive, employee-owned warehouse-style grocer with a stronghold in the western United States, has long been a favorite among value-conscious shoppers. It's a no-frills chain that thrives by keeping costs low and offering bulk deals, especially in produce-heavy departments. Winco's competitive edge lies in its lean business model, limited marketing, no credit card fees, and sprawling stores where customers bag their own groceries. But at the heart of that model is one key assumption: a steady pipeline of affordable food, particularly fresh produce, much of which comes directly from California's nearby farms. If that assumption falls apart, so does Winco's carefully balanced equation. The chain lacks the geographic diversity of national players. It's deeply rooted in regions already strained by climate and water crises. If California produce becomes scarce or prohibitively expensive, Winco can't simply absorb the cost or shift sourcing without undermining its low-price promise. Customers come to Winco for the idea that quality and affordability can coexist, but in a world where lettuce costs triple and grapes come from halfway around the world, that promise collapses. As its margins thin and competitors with more flexible sourcing step in, Winco could find itself backed into a corner, unable to raise prices without losing loyalty, yet unable to cut costs without gutting quality. Food Lion, the long-standing East Coast chain with over 1,100 stores, has made a name for itself by providing basic, accessible groceries in smaller towns and suburbs. Unlike high-end chains or bulk-focused discounters, Food Lion has lived in the middle, offering decent produce at affordable prices to budget-sensitive households. But that middle ground is increasingly treacherous. As California's supply dries up and nationwide demand strains other agricultural regions, chains like Food Lion face a deadly squeeze. They lack the premium pricing power of upscale stores and the supply chain leverage of national giants. Historically, Food Lion's produce offerings have relied heavily on large-scale distributors tied into California's supply web. When that web begins to fray, stores like Food Lion don't have the infrastructure or partnerships to pivot quickly. The result could be a slow but certain erosion of their appeal, shoppers noticing a decline in freshness, inconsistency in seasonal selections, or increases in price that no longer justify the brand's modest value proposition. In rural and underserved communities where Food Lion has long been a lifeline, the slow degradation of produce quality could drive customers toward superstores like Walmart or toward delivery services that offer more reliable options, even if they come at a premium. As Food Lion struggles to maintain relevance in a shifting agricultural ecosystem, closures and consolidations may become its new normal. Save-A-Lot, a discount grocery chain catering to low-income communities across the Midwest and Southeast, operates on a razor-thin margin and an ultra-streamlined business model. This chain is not built for shocks. It thrives by offering fewer choices, deeply discounted prices, and a small footprint shopping experience that reduces overhead. The problem? Its ability to undercut competitors on price depends almost entirely on the assumption of cheap, abundant produce. That assumption was already cracking before California's agricultural issues escalated. Now, it's buckling. Save-A-Lot doesn't have the negotiating clout of a Kroger or the international reach of an Aldi. When prices rise at the source because fields are dry, crops are scarce, or transport routes are bottlenecked, Save-A-Lot simply can't absorb the cost. The stores may try to substitute with canned or frozen alternatives, but this undermines the experience and appeal of the store to those relying on it for affordable nutrition. Even worse, its customer base is often the most vulnerable to economic shocks. If bananas cost twice what they did a month ago, that's not a frustration, it's a barrier. For a chain already operating under financial strain and trying to recover from years of store closures and declining relevance, the ripple effect from a collapsing farm economy could push Save-A-Lot further into contraction. Some locations may survive. Others, especially in communities with alternative options, might not. Ralph's, a Southern California institution owned by Kroger, faces a distinctly localized threat. Unlike its parent company's national sprawl, Ralph's has always been closely tied to the state of California, geographically, culturally, and agriculturally. Its identity is steeped in California produce, California shoppers, and California farming. For decades, Ralph's has symbolized the quintessential West Coast grocery store, its aisles brimming with fresh local fruits, artisan breads, and farm-to-table branding. But as California's farmland dries up and new planting restrictions take hold, the very soil that nurtured Ralph's identity is slipping away. The irony is painful. A chain so connected to its roots now finds those roots dying. As local farms falter and water becomes a privilege rather than a given, Ralph's will have to reach farther afield for the same items it once sourced next door. The result is not just logistical strain, it's cultural dissonance. The fresh Californian identity becomes harder to defend when avocados arrive from Peru and tomatoes come with a carbon footprint. For Ralph's, adapting to this reality may mean alienating a customer base that shops there because it still believes in the ideal of the California harvest. If Ralph's can't reconcile its local brand with a globalized supply chain, it may slowly fade, not with a bang, but with the slow drip of lost trust and shrinking relevance. Giant Eagle, based in Pittsburgh and operating across Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Maryland, has long juggled two roles: neighborhood grocer and aspirational brand. Its stores feature a mix of bargain items and upscale offerings, artisanal cheeses next to family-packed chicken, local bakery goods beside national brands. Produce is one of its cornerstones, positioned to compete with national chains and farmers markets alike. But Giant Eagle's reliance on broad national distribution means that even far from California, the fallout of agricultural decline is inescapable. Much of its premium produce is still sourced from the West, especially during winter months when local growing is impossible. As California's yield deteriorates, Giant Eagle may find its upscale image hard to maintain. Customers walking in for heirloom tomatoes or plumpstone fruits may instead find lackluster substitutions or prices that no longer match the experience. Compounding this is the region's increasing competition from more agile players: Aldi, Lidl, and even Amazon Fresh. These brands can pivot faster, price more aggressively, or automate more extensively. Giant Eagle, by contrast, is a legacy brand trying to stay current. The strain of sourcing challenges layered on top of rising expectations could fracture its careful balancing act. As its most loyal shoppers begin looking elsewhere and its profit margins dip, the chain could face painful decisions: reduce quality, raise prices, or shutter underperforming locations. None of those paths bodes well for long-term survival. What binds these supermarket chains together? Winco Foods, Food Lion, Save-A-Lot, Ralph's, and Giant Eagle is not just their vulnerability to the collapse of Central Valley agriculture, but their dependence on narratives that the Valley has long supported. Whether it's the affordability promised by Save-A-Lot, the West Coast authenticity of Ralph's, or the bulk and fresh ethos of Winco, each brand is built on assumptions that are now disintegrating. As America's most productive farmland runs dry and supply chains break under the weight of climate and crisis, these chains will be asked to do the impossible: maintain prices, quality, and identity in an environment where all three are under siege. Survival in this new food economy won't just require better logistics or diversified suppliers. It will demand a reinvention of the grocery model itself. For the vulnerable, it will mean confronting some painful truths: that the golden age of cheap, fresh, ubiquitous produce may be over, that loyalty cannot be bought with nostalgia, and that adaptability, not legacy, will define the future of food retail. For these supermarket chains, the next decade won't just be about outpricing or outmarketing their rivals. It will be about weathering a storm that begins not in the boardroom, but in the brittle soil of a vanishing farm. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on which chains will close? Will prices rise? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.